You're going to speak to the revisions too.
Only about the revision.
Yeah.
We have to stick to the stuff that's...
No reruns.
To the point only. Yes. To the point only.
Mr. Schofield in the wetlands, no river country club.
Different wetlands.
All right, let's start.
Me too. Don't stop beating a dead horse. I knew it was
Let's go.
constant.
It's time to go.
Did he make par?
We want the 4 questions asked and answered. No stories.
Good evening. 7 o'clock.
Get to the point.
I'd like to call a public hearing of the Stratford Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission to order. Public hearing concerns IWWA application 2016-7V, development of a single-family residential dwelling, 2,800 square feet within an upland review area of wetlands, and restoration of regulated upland habitat, 33,000 square feet, which was previously clear-cut without a permit. Site address 350 Whippoorwill Lane, Stratford, Connecticut. Assessors map 50.16, Block 1, Lot 82. Violator applicant Shayna Wolf. Is the applicant or representative present?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of the Wetlands Commission. Nicholas Owen, 4 Whippoorwill Lane, Stratford, Connecticut, acting on behalf of Shayna Wolf. And Mr. Hirsch, he is in attendance this evening. Along with Mr. Hirsch, I have with me yet again Mr. Sachs, our wetlands and landscape architect expert. And I have with me again this evening Mr. Chris DeAngelis from the good firm of DeAngelis and Cabrera. They're engineers on this development. At this time, I would just like to turn it over either to Mr. Sachs or Mr. DeAngelis, whichever individual the commission would like to hear from first.
Why don't we take a look at the revised site plan first?
Okay. And this, we will answer those 4 or 5 questions with the corrections on the plans that you had indicated that you were looking for at the last public hearing. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission and staff. My name is Stuart Sachs. I'm a landscape architect, and I would like to just take a moment to set up the drawings that we showed you last month and the changes that are on the most recent drawing. I'll set up the drawings in the order of the previous and the new.
Excuse me, can that be moved back a little bit?
Give me a chainsaw.
Is that okay?
Yeah, move over.
All right.
Let's leave it, that's fine where it is. I've only seen it one time.
I also have one little somewhat manufactured handout to talk about so we can be on the same page. Yeah, there's two sheets, 8.5, 11. Primarily, if we could just step back for a minute, go back a few months, look at the first drawing, 8.5, 11. And it's pretty much, I think, what a typical application coming to you in the normal process would have started with. And then, as a matter of fact, it's what the owner in part started with. I'm not talking about the violation. I'm talking about the process of an application that would normally be done. And they set the house and garage, the driveway. The preliminary discussion was where the stormwater and the septic system would go. And I don't doubt that if a year ago the applicant came in with the first one, you would have said, from an environmental point of view, we would like you to move the septic system as far away as possible from the wetlands. And that's pretty much what's happened in the third, or what I call the third drawing. It's the second sheet. And I'm presenting this only because I think we're getting to a point of a question about which comes first, the chicken or the egg. We clearly got it backwards, whatever the question is. But I also don't want to stand here and point fingers and say, I'm the pot calling the kettle black. We all know that all the houses in that area cut down dozens of trees when they were built. Since that time, however, I think we have some much wiser regulations on the book, and we know the value of wetlands. Having said that, not all of the lawns in the surrounding properties have 50 or now 63 feet of buffer. So I want you to weigh that, because here's an initial application for building a house and what typically would have done, and we're proposing something that should be done. Regardless of what the conditions are, this would have been an answer I think you should have come up with a year ago. Having said that, moving the septic system to me is primary concern because of its proximity. And now it's situated as far away as possible from the wetlands. The areas for disturbance are pretty much the same. I didn't do an exact CAD-based drawing here. I just sort of made a quick hand drawing at about 5 o'clock, and I wanted to just use these to say that this is something that takes some basic concerns, not a lot of technical stuff. All of the neighbors know that this is about what's being done and what they've done. And the difference is basically that this house is going to be, in some ways, a little bit better. The process has clearly been a pain in the neck. If you, again, look at the two drawings that are presented here, since the last episode or hearing, I'd like to admit that we all make mistakes sometimes. And I think the counselor clearly pointed out that their consultant found that there were 2 trees that were unlabeled. If it's a technical concern to you, and if you really had a magnifying glass, there weren't 2 trees. There were 5. I make mistakes. I told Nick earlier, the last time I was perfect was the day I was born, and he said he wasn't sure about that. But it's been corrected. And I think that that's analogous to what has happened to Mr. Hirsch. He made a pretty grievous mistake, and now we're trying to correct it. The difference between the two plans is basically, when you look at it, I know it's difficult to see a difference between them, but if you look at the house and the rock outcrop to its right, you will see that in the newer drawing, there's more separation. And that's part of the indication. The house moved 9 feet further away from the wetlands and 10 feet further away from that rock outcrop. There is about a dozen or so or more plants that I've added to it because I think it's needed now that we have a little more area for coverage. And I think I have a fairly good grasp of the fact that this would be a typical construction project if you had a house being constructed. And the process, even on the engineer's drawing, you see that the silt fence he has is actually about 25 or 30 feet away from the house. And that's a pretty typical sort of expectancy for the roofing contractors, the foundation contractors, the concrete trucks that have to come in. The sequence of building the house, along with doing the septic and stormwater and some of the mitigation plantings, is not a linear sequence. It is often reiterative because we are dependent upon weather, plant delivery, availability. Those are the factors, particularly the weather, changes the timing for planting. You can do a lot of the construction work and subsequent start on the plantings at the same time. I don't think that there is a hindrance because of the plants, but there would certainly be a waste if you went in and did the planting and then did the construction, because you would literally be stepping on it. I don't mean to be out there every day, nor do I want to be out there every day giving a lesson to carpenters or excavation guys on what the different plants are that they're stepping on or driving over. On the other hand, there are silt fences that have to go up and be maintained all through construction, and they go hand in hand with the planting. At the last hearing, I said I thought there was probably a 3-year maintenance requirement. And Steve was saying that he thought that the Corps of Engineers or some of the other companies and agencies require much longer. But understand also that a lot of the Corps of Engineer projects are not in people's backyards. They're miles of work along a river, or if it's the DOT, it might be 5 miles of side plantings and whatever. And the establishment maintenance for that work is much different than someone who's looking at it every day out their back window. The plant quality would be very different between the two types of projects. I'm not sure if you've ever gone to a nursery and said, I want to buy a tree. Excuse me. And they say, what type of tree? And you say, well, a maple tree. Okay. And then they take you out and they say, here's one. But the same diameter, the same height tree in the same nursery can be almost 100% difference in the cost, because one is considered what they call a park grade tree. It'll be growing big enough in a few years. But a select or a prime that I would want in a residential location is much fuller. The branches are more even. It hasn't been damaged in any of the trucking. And as a consequence, the costs are different. But the expectations go along with those cost differences. Residential quality is considerably better quality. If there are any specific questions you have, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't want to keep you late.
You want to go first? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Sachs. A question was raised during our last public hearing from the intervener's expert witness in regards to how are you going to irrigate the plantings over the period, the growth period, for whatever amount of years we designate, seeing that there's no dwelling there or water source?
Good question. Twofold. I don't mean to be flip, but understand that the guy who invented the plants doesn't have any piping.
No, I agree. But I personally live, my home is on the top of a slope. And I can't even grow grass half the time. And I've lived there for 35 years. Now, you're going to plant an extensive planting array there. Are you just willing to pull out the dead plants that don't make it and replant over this period of time? Because water's going to be your biggest factor here.
It is.
I don't care what else you do, okay?
Absolutely. And this, I said there were two parts to the answer. They'll have to get a water truck to be in there. But if they're doing the construction of the house and getting approval to do that work for the house.
Yeah, but that construction of the house isn't going to happen for a long time, okay? Even if it's granted, you're not going to put a shovel in the ground until this agency is satisfied with the growth period. You understand?
Yeah, sure.
There's not going to be an excavator going in there until that woman over there is happy with the process and the progress of the growing period, no matter how long we stipulate, okay? So I'm not even worried about that construction phase. I'm only worried about how are the plants going to be maintained over that period of time to grow and thrive and flourish, to restore that slope. That's basically it.
I understand. There was only one answer, and that has to be a water truck.
Okay. All right, well, I mean, that's better than nothing.
Yeah,
All right.
Unless they have some sort of agreement with one of the neighbors, and they can get a hose over there, and they put a meter.
He had a few people here that were in favor of this application, okay, that were agreeable to him doing this project. Maybe they'll let him use their water source. I don't know. But I would like that stipulated somehow if this thing is, if there's a positive attitude towards passing this application.
From my point of view, and I think from the commission's point of view, you have to see a sustained growth. We have to see that the plants are thriving. If it rains once a week, we're lucky. Boy, are we lucky. If it's a drought for 2 months, the owner is going to know exactly what every gallon of water costs.
Okay.
He's going to.
All right.
That's the only way to do it.
I just was looking for some kind of answer, that's all. All right?
You're perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm good. No, just want to get to the questions, that's all. Any other questions? No, the ones we're supposed to talk about. Do you have any questions?
Good.
Did you want to hear any comments or discussions?
Well, I don't know if you're the gentleman that would want to answer this, but there was questions on blasting. Is that something you want to deal with? Blasting that outcropping of rock?
I think we've already talked about the fact, or you have stated that.
Yeah, well, you talked about it, but is this a chemical process that you're talking about?
I have already sent Christina information on Dexpan and betaminate. Those are two chemical rock splitting processes that are non-polluting, no explosion, no permitting required. It's a very safe way to do rock breaking.
Tina, have you gone over that and you're satisfied with any harsh, residue that might leach down into the...
Yeah, there's none.
You're good with it? Okay. That's all I want to know.
There's no blasting to do planting of trees. That's secondary. Let's talk about one thing at a time. But that's after. We're talking about the plantings first.
Okay, we're all set.
Thank you very much.
Anything else, Nick?
Did you want to have any questions for the engineer?
If he wants to review any revisions made to the stormwater engineering plan,
Chris, would you come up, please, and answer whatever questions that the commission may have for you?
For the record, Chris DeAngelis from Cabezas DeAngelis Engineering and Surveying in Bridgeport, Connecticut. We revised the site plan as outlined in a letter to Ms. Stempado, May 3rd. We moved the house as much as we could while still accommodating the septic system. We do have approval via email from the Stratford Health Department that the septic system is now acceptable, as shown on the latest plans. Other plan revisions, we took off, there was a erroneous note, 50-foot setback on the plans. We took that out. We clarified there is no foundation drain. That was a question that came up last time. And then we reran the drainage calculations. They changed slightly because the house is now a little bit further away from the wetlands. This had a positive effect by allowing more water to get to the wetlands, whereas before there was a comment by the opposition's expert witness that we were taking too much water away from the wetlands. So by moving the house a little bit further away from the wetlands, we allowed a little bit more flow to go into the wetlands. We also made a note on our calculations.
Could you hold on 1 minute, please? Tape.
Sure.
Thank you.
that's fine. If it's not working. Do we have another tape we can try?
Not another tape recorder. I don't think it's tape. I think it's the record. Tape is working. I mean, it's on.
That's okay. It is being recorded, so I can
Yeah.
set it for the town.
Yeah.
Just getting back to the issue about how much flow reaches the wetlands, we made a note on our memo of May 3rd that although it may seem like less water is reaching the wetlands because we now have some stormwater detention, that water that goes into the detention system recharges the groundwater and ultimately does make its way back down into the, to recharge the wetlands. But it's not considered surface runoff at that point. So when we compare, existing to proposed drainage calculations, we're generally looking at surface discharge. So it's beneficial to get the water into the ground as we've done. And other than that, that's pretty much it. There was one of the comments from Stratford Health Department was to show the water system on the plans, and I think on this generation of plans I added the water line coming up from Whippoorwill, so that was another important thing that had to do with getting the approval from the health department.
Any questions from any of the commissioners?
Did he say this is city water?
I'm sorry?
Was it city water you said?
Yes, yeah. When we initially did the plans, we weren't sure if it was going to be city water or well, but we've since determined that water is available, and we're now showing that on the plans. That's correct.
Any other questions? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would the intervener like to approach?
Thank you very much, members of the commission. Thank you for your patience last time. I know it was a lengthy night for everyone, and we really appreciate the attention that the commission gave this important matter. And I'll be very, very brief today, just a few points suggested by the presentation we just heard. Mr. Sachs mentioned the notion, there was some implication that there was some comparison should be made to what other homes in the neighborhood had done. I mean, I think it should be noted that my home and others, the abutting homes, were built in 1987, and permits were issued before the grandfather date of the regulations and statutory scheme. So it has nothing to do with this application to point to what other neighbors have done. Completely irrelevant. It should be disregarded. The panel has before it, the commission has before it, uncontroverted expert testimony in this case from Mr. Danzer on the subject of what ought to happen here from his perspective, which was the notion that we ought to have a restoration first before we see whether any building ought to proceed on this parcel. And in fact, last time, and I hear Mr. Sachs today to be retreating from it a little bit, talking about mixing the construction with the restoration in some way, he was very candid to his credit. And we think the restoration plan itself is a fine plan. And to Mr. Sachs's credit last time, he was very candid in saying that he thought that, and he mentioned this figure again today, that it would really take 3 years to see whether this property could be restored. And I listened to this talk about a maple tree and trees, how beautiful these trees are going to be. And it's tragic because we think about the trees that obviously were lost and can never be reclaimed, and we're looking for, 30, 40 years down the road when we're going to see anything like what we saw on that property before. I'm not fully privy with all this blasting. I haven't seen that data with the chemical blasting. I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I mean, it sounds like that's an issue that could come up before another body as well, but if the extent, it wasn't clear to me that this commission was passing on the propriety of this particular chemical process being applied within 60 or 70 feet or whatever it may be from the wetlands. So I can't really speak to it because I haven't reviewed that material. If they were submitted, I don't believe I was copied on it, so I'm not sure what to say about that other than that it sounds to me like something that would bear close study before it was approved. And in conclusion, I would just ask the commission to review carefully the intervention at paragraph 29, A and B. We state the position that we advance or advocate in this proceeding, which is that in the first instance, our proposal would be that the application, to the extent that it seeks a permit to build, be denied outright, but that the restoration plan obviously be approved to proceed. Failing that, we would suggest that the alternative would be, and nothing less than this, the alternative would be that the commission require the restoration to proceed and allow the applicant to come back at some later date. In other words, to sever the two matters which have been joined, were joined last fall, and ask instead that they be severed and that the application be denied without prejudice to its being renewed at some later date after there's been a demonstration of the good faith of the applicant in restoring this property, and that the commission itself, through its staff, can ascertain that there actually has been proper restoration of the property, taking into account all the variables, including the problem of the water and many other obstacles that they're going to face to get this property properly restored along the lines of Mr. Sachs's drawings. So thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak in favor of this application? Any members that would like to speak in opposition to this application?
Tom, here. I just have a couple more questions for Mr. Owen.
Go ahead.
If I could. After reviewing this and seeing the placement of the house, I personally would probably have a more favorable attitude towards this application if this house could be moved even a little further away from the wetland. Is it possible to get another 10 or 15 feet?
Excuse me one second. The engineer just expressed to me that we are probably at the maximum where we can move the house, and there are a couple of reasons. Number one, the septic system that was designed is designed within the parameters set forth by the health department.
Right.
It has to be 15 feet away from the house and 15 feet away from one of the setbacks. I would like the commission, no disrespect intended, to keep in mind that we are not in the wetlands. We are within the 250 review, and I know you're aware of it.
I understand, and I'll tell you my concern, and maybe you could ease my concern. My concern is that when you start the construction, you're going to put a full basement in this house, okay? Footings, the whole 9 yards, okay? You're going to have a lot of equipment up there, okay? Especially with the terrain and ledge and all the other things that are involved here. How are you going to keep any materials that are excavated from getting into that 50-foot wetland setback where your new planting area is? What kind of a buffer are you going to use? And it would have to be something that's sturdy, okay? I'm not saying mafia blocks or anything like that, but that's my concern, that during the construction phase, there's going to be debris that's going to, I mean, you're on the top of a slope, okay? You know how stuff rolls. It rolls downhill. How could you safeguard that? What type of barrier, other than a silt fence and a hay bale, which really doesn't do much other than collect light debris? What can you do to safeguard that? That's all I'm asking. If you could ease my mind, I don't have a problem where the house sits.
I'm going to have, I can answer part of that question, but I'm going to have the engineer speak to that issue with you in order to solidify and make you guys, make the commission feel comfortable.
Okay.
I will, before I bring him up again, tell you that it will be a double silt fence line, side-by-side hay bales, impervious, so that the silt, if silt does go over, it will not infect or affect that upland review area. And I would also like to state to you that there is somewhat of a misstatement or a misgiving. It is not our intent, nor do I believe, if I may be so bold, to say to the commission, to have you approve the restoration, approve the building, and start both tomorrow, so to speak.
Right.
That is simply, we're not under any illusion that that's going to happen. And there's a couple of reasons. First of all, you're not going to allow it. Secondly, I have at least one or maybe two more additional steps that I have to go through in order to make this lot potentially a building lot. It is not a building lot right now. It has all of the earmarks, and it looks like a building lot, feels like a building lot, but I do need approvals from Board of Zoning Appeals and possibly the Planning Commission. So it's going to give enough time within that period, at least a year and a half, for those plantings to establish themselves. But to get back directly to what I just said, a double row of hay bales, side by side, impervious, and a double silt fence along that. And if the engineer has something else, Chris, that we can protect that upland review area with, I'm going to let him speak to that.
Okay.
From a simple, practical, and effective measure, I think that the boulder line that we've already indicated on the plans could be more continuous, or even we could put up a chain link fence if you think that's a concern. I don't have any worries, honestly, about soil eroding downhill, boulders rolling downhill. It's not a very steep. I think if you look at the section drawing, that's at scale. That's nothing exaggerated about that, and I think it shows that it's not as severe. However, if we put the boulders, double them up, triple them up, butt them together, or a chain link fence, I think that would...
Let me ask you a question. Nick, are you going to have a site manager that's going to be designated during the construction phase of this?
Yes.
He's going to be your site manager?
He is going to be...
And how often are you going to report to Tina's office?
As often as required by this commission or your office.
In reviewing all of the materials from the public hearing, if we were to grant the permit for restoration, it'll obviously be restoration first, followed by construction. The amount of time that the restoration has to be in place before construction happens would be at the discretion of the commission. We've heard recommendations from 1 to 5 years, essentially. And as far as Stuart reporting to me regarding the efficacy of the restoration, I would recommend every month, to be honest.
But how about the? I'm more concerned with the construction phase as well, because
Well, first of all, the construction phase, no matter what, is not going to happen.
No, we know that.
Restoration has taken hold.
Exactly.
And then during the term, or during the time of building, perhaps we can do, maybe a quarterly report to me on the progress, on the state of the restored area during the construction phase. We could do even more than that. We could do.
Well, I would say the most important phase would be the first 2 weeks of groundbreaking. Then after that, once footings are poured and foundations are in, and other than backfilling, there's not going to be much more activity up there.
And I see another way of safeguarding ourselves if we were to grant both aspects of the project is require that the applicant put a conservation easement on the restored area. So that way, once we have a conservation easement set up, if they were to ever do anything during the construction phase of the process that harmed the conserved area, we have recourse to go back and say, now you're in violation of your permit because you're into the conservation easement area, or you've in some way denuded the conservation easement area. So I think that there are plenty of ways we can condition the permit to protect the restored area during a construction phase of the project.
I have another. Can I ask you a question first?
Go ahead.
You're going to go before possibly planning. You're going to have to go before BZA, okay?
That's first.
Now, I've been on enough boards and commissions to know what happens during these meetings. Let's say that they come up with stipulations and they're not happy with the placement of the house, okay? What happens then?
We have to come back to this commission and tell this commission what has happened to see if a change can be made. Obviously,
A modification to the application.
that's correct. Now, that would be at the discretion of this commission.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
there is,
Go ahead.
Christina, to your point, I know the last public hearing we stipulated that we have no issue placing or having placed a conservation easement on the property. That's not an issue at all. Now, I will tell you, you guys, and I think you already know this. Part of the application process, when you take out or attempt to take out a building permit, it's called application for building permit. On one of the sections, there are a number of departments that have to sign off. That is the ultimate safeguard. Say, for argument's sake, that this doesn't happen the way we think it's all going to happen, and we haven't put all of the pieces in place, and our professionals haven't done their job, which is, I doubt that they won't do their job. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Sachs is one of the foremost experts in this area. That's one of the reasons he was hired, to make sure this thing is going to get done correctly and it is monitored correctly. And if you take a look at this application, and I am going to submit it into the record, this is an original. It has a number of areas. Number one, to be filled out by the tax assessor, you need a sign-off. To be filled out by the engineering or for sanitary sewer, that's the health department, that's a sign-off. To be filled out, if it's a food establishment, doesn't apply. However, the most important one is area number 5, to be filled out by inland wetlands and signed. All Tina has to do, or whoever's in that office, I assume it's going to be Christina. I hope so. And if she says it's fine, she signs. If she says it's not fine, she doesn't sign, and there's nothing we can do about it. We cannot pull out a building permit at that point. That is the ultimate safeguard. And I'd like to submit this in.
I think as an additional safeguard, after we determine a set amount of time that we believe the restoration should take place over, whether that be 1 year to 5 years, I believe the applicant should still have to come back in front of us just to approve that the restoration has been completed to the standards that we've set forth.
Would that be an administrative function at that point?
That can be an administrative function. You can come back and I can present the reports that Stuart has sent to me that restoration has been favorable. And if the commission agrees, we can certainly move forward with saying, okay, now you can move on to part 2 of the application,
Okay.
which would be construction. At that time, if there was any question that restoration was not adequate, the town can hire our own landscape architect or ecologist to go in and make a determination on whether they believe the restoration to be adequate. But I believe for the most part that Stuart has done an excellent job with his restoration plan, and I believe he's perfectly capable of giving us fair and honest updates.
I would like to say 2 more things, and then I will conclude. I think there has been a little misinterpretation on Attorney Schofield's memory, and I don't say that with any disrespect. He is quite a gentleman. Stuart Sachs represented that he thought, and he represented again tonight, that it would probably take a total of 3 years to make sure that all of these things were fully established and fully grown. However, he certainly didn't intend to say, nor did he mean, and he can testify himself, that we should hold up the process for a period of 3 years. And I would like to respectfully just say to the commission again, it would be great if you could see your way clear to put a minimum of 1.5 years or a maximum of 2 years before we start. Start the actual building, keeping in mind that it's probably going to take at least 5 or 6 months before we have an approval on the Board of Zoning Appeals for the waivers required, if in fact that happens. If it happens, we may have to go to the planning for another step, which would take another 3 or 4 months or 5 months. In the meantime, if Attorney Schofield doesn't like the decision, I certainly don't have to tell him he's an attorney. He certainly has a right to an appeal in Superior Court. We would appreciate if he didn't do it, because it's going to cost everybody more time and money. And I think that that's counterproductive. So I think the timing of this entire thing will fall into place basically on its own. But if you want to set a minimum requirement before we actually start construction, if we have that, I feel respectfully 1.5 years to 2 years would be plenty of time.
Your 1.5 to 2 years, that's after our growth period and establishment of the new growth? Is that what you're talking about? Let's say we arbitrarily pick 3 years as the time period we want to give the restoration to take hold, okay? You want another 1.5 years after that before you start to build your house? Is that what you
No.
want?
No. You're misunderstanding me, or I am saying it in a way that I'm not making myself clear. I would like the commission, and I respectfully request this, that you put at least a year and a half before we can start construction. In other words, if you approve the restoration plan tonight and you approve the building plan, obviously the first thing we have to accomplish is getting the restoration plan in.
Right, let's say we choose 3 years,
Okay.
okay? What do you want done? Do you want something done prior to the 3 years? Is that what you want?
Yes, between a year and a half and 2 years.
I don't think that's going to happen, okay? Personally.
I mean, based on the, obviously this came in as a violation. He clearly has to pay a penalty for what he did. And the fact that he denuded an entire lot is a real sticking point. That's a real problem. And from the testimony I heard, I would recommend at least 3 years before anything be built there. I would like to see that area completely restored. I want to see the trees growing and flourishing before we allow any sort of construction to take place on the property. And I mean, that's regardless of whether you feel that restoration can be adequately performed in a time frame lesser than 3 years, we also have to take into account that this was a major violation, and we don't want to see any screw-ups in the future. We want to be able to mitigate what was done and move forward. And honestly, the applicant held up the entire process for essentially a year by not coming to us right away after this violation took place, which is unfortunate because we missed out on essentially 2 growing seasons. So I don't believe it's too onerous to stick to 3 years, but I would leave that to the commission ultimately to decide.
Christina, I believe that is severely punishing the applicant for what he did. I really believe that. I'm not sure that you intend to mean it that way or present it that way, but that's how I am interpreting what you just said. No disrespect intended. The punishment is really the fact that he has, no question, he violated the rules. He is before this commission and he is paying a tremendous price for what he did. You could see by what was done in order to correct this and get approvals that he's paying a tremendous price. To me, that's punishment enough.
And I don't deny that, but ultimately, we're up here to protect our natural resources in town. So no matter, obviously, I understand he wants to get his house built, he wants to live there. There was an appropriate way to go about it, and that wasn't followed. And now we need to make sure that that area is restored before we allow anything to go there again. That's my personal opinion. And if the commission sees that some lesser duration than 3 years is fit, then that's up to them. My recommendation would be at least 3 years, but that's ultimately not my decision to make.
Am I interpreting part of what you're saying is that we will be allowed, or we would have the opportunity, prior to that 3 years, to have you come out and take a look, and if you think it's established enough, appear before the commission in administrative session and lessen that burden if you place a 3-year minimum on it? Is that what you're saying? Or am I putting words in your mouth?
You're putting words in my mouth. That's not what I said.
Well, I'm trying to.
But we can't make that a condition of the permit, that after 2 years, the commission, myself and the commission is pleased with the restoration, and Stuart can provide testimony to that effect, that the restoration after 2 years has taken good hold, and he believes that it will hold into perpetuity. Then perhaps the commission can decide, okay, 2 years, things look good, you can proceed with the building as you see fit. We can make that a condition of the permit, but ultimately, from what I heard, I believe a period of 3 years would be, should be held before the construction phase of the project can begin.
And I respectfully disagree with you.
And you're
But thank you. Stuart would like to say a couple of things and then we're concluding.
Again, this is Stuart Sachs. From a personal point of view, I like the attitude of a commission that holds tight to the regulation. I sit as chairman of a commission. Doesn't make a difference where, but I understand the importance of following the precedents and whatever. And we've heard some, I think, really heartfelt statements about reasonable or good faith practices. I don't want you to think, however, that some of the degree of technical imposition, and there is some, maybe it goes above and beyond what is either necessary or adequate. I'm still not convinced that the 50-foot buffer that Mr. Hirsch is going to be establishing is a good faith practice by any of the neighbors. Therefore, the wetlands by a perimeter has got 6 times more area exposed to pollution going into it from lawn chemicals, insecticides, and pesticides. Those are things that you have to weigh. I do think that the question of whether a plant is going to live, making it through at least one entire cycle, annual, which generally ends up being a year and a half from the time you plant it to the time it goes back to a suitable state, will tell you 95% of what's going to live. But I think the question of watering is paramount. Choice of materials, timing, and everything else. I just don't want the commission to get in a position where it oversteps a practice that is not supported by either the neighbors or the law. You have the right, as this commission, to impose any number of conditions, clearly. And I think you're talking about that. I just ask you to think about it from the perspective of the entire community, not just Mr. Hirsch's mistake.
I think with that we are pretty much concluded on rebuttal except for one issue. We have testified, and you know that he has spent, Mr. Hirsch, a great deal of money correcting a problem, no question that was self-created. So he's learned a hell of a lesson. The only other thing we can do is shackle him, handcuff him, and dump him in a wetland someplace. He's been punished enough. I would respectfully request the commission to waive the $1,000 fine. I think that not only has Mr. Hirsch learned a lesson, but anyone who is interested in wetlands and anybody who watches this on that public TV channel knows that they better not do what Mr. Hirsch did, because forget the $1,000 fine, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot more than that to correct the problem. And with that, I close my remarks, and I really thank you for your time.
1 second, I believe we still have a question.
I have a question for the commission. What is the guarantee that the restoration will go forward, irregardless of whether the house gets built or not? If the property is unsuitable for building, what guarantee do we have that the physical restoration will still take place?
The permit itself.
Okay.
If the applicant doesn't abide by the conditions of the permit, which would obviously include restoration, then we can take legal action against the applicant, the permittee. What's that? Correct. And we'll also have a bond.
We understand that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I speak?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just a couple quick notes. On the question of the neighbors, again, that came up just again with Mr. Sachs' statement. I think the only factual evidence in the record about any neighbor was Mr. Zahner's testimony that when it came time to build a fence in his yard at 110 Butternut, he hired Steve Danzer and proceeded exactly as this commission would dictate. So the only record evidence of the neighbors is that the neighbors complied with the law. So I'm not quite sure what this comparison is that is being drawn. So with that exception, I would just say that I think what we're hearing here is that it seems to me, based on the concerns that the commission has expressed about the house, the septic, and everything, is that the appropriate step is to require the restoration first. And only then should the applicant come back, assuming restoration is successful, and submit some application. 3 years from now, things could change. There could be new technology for the stormwater drainage, any number of things. There could be a new technology that makes the blasting less insidious of a problem. So I would urge the commission, again, to look at paragraph 29 of the intervention and to follow either A or B, our requested remedies. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I object to him getting up. This was rebuttal. He didn't have a legal right to do what he did, but he did it. However, the restoration has to be done first. We are aware of that. We feel that these petitions were put together for a purpose, so this commission would see exactly what we intended to do. So to approve one, deny another, whether with prejudice or without prejudice, and start from square one 2 or 3 years from now is counterproductive. So we appreciate the fact that this petition was brought in together, and we would like it approved together. Thank you.
Can I just mention one thing? If over the course of time, after the restoration takes place, if these plans were to change in any way structurally, it would have to come back in front of the commission for a modification, essentially. So we still would have control over that process. It would have to come for a modification because essentially you're changing the plans which we approved. So I believe that grants us another safeguard.
We understand. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. With that, we're going to close this public hearing. Thank you.
Motion to close.
Motion, second?
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Close.
Motion to close the public hearing. That was a motion.
Take a, yeah, that was a motion to close.
That was a motion to close this,
Public hearing.
this, this.
Motion to accept it with the stipulations.
Yeah, I know,
And get a date when they start, and then we will review it a year and a half
So-
to see what's happening.
Sure. But
Ronnie, can we do that?
what I would recommend
Yeah,
I want
public
to just
hearing.
duplicate what you're saying.
Second? All in favor?
Second, yeah, I second.
Okay.
Can I-
Take a 5-minute recess?
I was going to make,
Take a 5-minute recess, and we'll open up the regular meeting. Okay? Yeah. What?
Cheers. I don't know
How do you either?
No.
Oh, it is.
For a 5-minute recess.
So I can at least know
A public hearing.
But I don't know. They don't start tomorrow. I've sat down about 3 hours before all meetings. And, you know, by the time I leave here, my legs feel like
Oh, I mean, some of those, this zone is getting to be. I gave up because I used to do Short Beach and Parks and Rec, which were nice, easy meetings. But I gave them up because just the zoning was getting to me. I wish somebody would change the zoning, but nobody wants it.
zoning is the laws. You know what I noticed? That Stephanie, just like
It depends on who is in charge. That's it. All depends on. Well, we talked a lot too.
Were you here at the last meeting?
but that's what I'm saying. But
No, I had a Republican town committee meeting at the same time. Because they switched the dates.
John Terry, I got yeah, we're not, you know.
You waiting up?
Oh, yeah.
I don't really know too much about
Harriers over there.
Yeah, they're not too bad.
Harriers,
No, because very seldom.
right, they got put in the ground.
I know something that's really controversial and random. They're not usually too bad.
You gotta wait. I said, Terry is behind you. No, I'm talking to my wife. I'm talking to my wife. Right, that's my, yeah. And then it's right here.
Have you been to Kansas City lately?
No, we're gonna go to the casino. My 46th birthday is next Monday.
Okay.
So, we're just gonna go. My wife, she keeps getting these free nights at Foxwood, so we're gonna
Yeah,
stay.
I do. Do we get them
But
every
the
month?
hard thing is, you know, we were getting them during the week between Monday and Thursday.
Right, right.
But now she's getting them Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Really? Wow.
So we can't go Thursday because we got
Yeah, yeah.
my daughter's babies.
Oh, yeah, I know. We used
You know,
to.
that's-
Yeah, yeah.
But then we're gonna stay Friday and Saturday.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't get for that. I just get it Monday, Thursday.
Yeah, yeah. She's been getting the weekends. So.
Yeah,
So
that's
we're gonna
great.
take advantage of it.
Yeah,
Atlantic
might as
City,
well.
though.
No, I won't go back there
Not for a
again.
while.
It's just too far to drive for what?
That's the killer. You know,
Yeah.
4 hours, 4.5 hours in a car.
They keep on
And we
sending me
stop
the
a couple
things.
of times.
free room and $10 and slot machines.
Yes.
So yeah.
And they don't give you the thing.
No.
She gets it. She'll get for both nights. She'll get 25 and 25.
Yeah. Yeah.
She'll get points towards the buffet if you want to.
So if we
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I gotta tell you, there was one time, I don't even know how I got it, but they sent me a thing, $400 in free stuff. Really? We gotta go. I said, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. So I called up and, yeah, she said, yeah. So we went down and they gave me $400.
You can't cash it in. You got to use.
No, it was, but, well,
Yeah.
yeah, good.
Yeah.
Like if I put, they asked how I wanted, could get it $100,
Yeah,
you know, like.
that's
the
good,
60.
that's good.
But I did, I got it in 50. But what you did is put the $50 in. Now, if you got up to $75, you could take
Yes.
your money out. But,
That's fair.
yeah, once you get the 50.
That stops
But they
people from
really
playing,
did. I
you know,
mean,
$1 and
Yeah,
getting 40
yeah,
or something.
yeah. Well, that's why I told my husband, I said, this is the only way to go there again. It was
But they must
$400.
have thought you were a high roller.
I don't know what they thought. Unless I was
been on
in,
some list.
there were,
Wait,
well,
hold on, leave that there for a
Well,
second.
here
Make
is
sure I have
a lot
it.
because you're off the beat.
yeah, yeah. But I could have used it in Caesars and anything.
No.
Are we ready?
One more minute.
Okay.
You got technicalities?
No, they'll have to calculate that for me. Building will be allowed into.
Are these all the conditions that you guys can say? Yeah? Okay, phase two. Just read them off. I don't know. Yeah.
Can you read that? So these are the conditions, and it goes over to here. So we've got. Okay.
Here, Jeff.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Because with stipulations, yeah.
What about?
Yeah. Why?
No. I mean, you can do it. I'll sign it. Okay. If I'm on that.
Yeah, well, we see what that is.
What's that?
You need registration, easement.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's fine. When I wrote my manual. And should we put that after we, or should we put it as a condition that they must? Let's put it as a condition. Here, let me have that back.
Jimmy,
One more thing.
Can you read that?
Okay. You are going to give me that after, right?
Good evening again. It's 8:05. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Stratford Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Commission to order. First order of business is approval of minutes of April 27th. Has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. We have a second. Mr. Slager, all in favor? Minutes are approved. Under old business, we have the application 2016-7, development of single-family residential dwelling, 2,800 square feet with an upland review area of wetlands and restoration of regulated upland habitat, 33,000 square feet, previously clear-cut without a benefit of a permit, site address 350 Whipple Lane, Stratford, Assessors Rep 50.16, Block 1, Lot 82, applicant Shana Wolf.
I'll make a motion to take it off the table.
We have a motion to take that off the table. We have a second? Second. In favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, I want to make a motion to accept the application in front of us with some conditions, beginning immediately, the restoration of the property, easement granted in favor of the town, a monthly report from Stuart to Tina, bond on the property put in place, no construction to take place within at least 4 years after restoration, unless they want to come in 2 years to prove the growth and everything is in place, come to the board. No building will be allowed until the restoration is approved formally by the commission, and the violation fee will reduce to $500 prior to the permit issued.
I'll make a second.
We have a second. Any discussion?
No?
That pretty much covers everything, right?
I'm sorry?
Just a question. In his motion, we're approving the restoration plan as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
To begin
Right.
immediately.
Well,
Okay.
so
Within 30 days.
30 days of issuance of the permit.
for clarity, can I ask the Conservation Administrator to
Here, let me read it into the record.
read back the motion into the record so we all understand what we're talking about?
So the conditions of the permit will be to begin restoration immediately upon receipt of the permit, at least within 30 days. An easement, conservation easement granted in favor of the town for the area up to the boulders, as indicated on the site plans. Monthly reports during the restoration portion of the project to be provided by Stewart to staff. A bond to be placed on the project, so a bond to cover the entire portion of the restoration and any sediment and erosion control that will eventually be necessary for the construction process. No construction to take place until at least 4 years after restoration has been completed, but you may petition the commission after 2 years, and if we deem the restoration to be adequate and complete at that time, we can move forward with allowing, or with signing off on your building permits. No building will be allowed until restoration is approved formally by this commission, and the violation fee of $500 will be paid prior to permit issuance.
So we have a motion, we have a second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's approved.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.
Yes. Moving on to new business, we have no new business. Next item is staff report.
For the staff report, I'm actually going to ask Mr. Fitzpatrick, who's here, to come up. Mr. Fitzpatrick came before us with, came to my office to drop off an application for, I'm sorry, what's the address on it?
577 Hawley Lane.
577 Holly Lane. Let me distribute the materials, actually, so we're looking at everything.
Just one other business you got to talk about. Some people.
Distribute those to us. Tom, can you pass those out?
Thank you.
No, this did not come in your packet.
No.
Because the application fee, due to the fact that there's going to be over 4,000 square feet of actual wetlands being disturbed, it shot up the application fee to be over $11,000. So Mr. Fitzpatrick is here to petition us to reduce the amount of the application fee. So I'll let him speak, and then I'll discuss what I gather from the regulations and what I believe is both legal and prudent on our part. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. James Fitzpatrick, 170 Morningdew Lane, Stratford. Basically, my application turned out to be a big one on the as far as the area to be filled, which was a surprise to me because we were actually pulling the project away from the wetland where it exists now. There's a grassed area that we intend to use a portion of that and let the balance of the grassed area revert back into wetland. So I thought that the fee was going to be a lot less than it is. I don't have a problem with the fee amount. I'd like to defer a portion of it, if possible. I'd like to pay a certain amount upfront for with this application, so the commission can hear the application, but defer the rest of the payment, the balance of the payment, the $11,000, to be paid should the application get approved at the time of permit issuance. So I'm not asking for a waiver. I'm not asking for a reduction. I'm just asking for a deferment.
I think what we should do is review the materials and then at our next meeting decide how to proceed. It might mean that you won't be able to get on the agenda. Well, no, let me think about that. Yeah, we'd have to make a decision on the filing fee at our next meeting, which would be June. So we might not be able to formally accept the application until July.
So there would be no, even if we agreed that night, I wouldn't be able to pay that night a certain amount to have it accepted. I mean,
Well, you know what, since you have a substantially complete application as it is, I believe we might be able to do that. Let me review the rest of the application materials first, and if everything else is complete and we have all the other material we need besides the application fee, then I believe at the next meeting we could accept the application and expect payment, let's say within a week of the acceptance of the application. I think we could do that, but I'd like to give the commission a chance to kind of think this over first. My only hesitation is that the fees are in place in order essentially just to protect the wetlands, to protect exactly what's happening. And when these large-scale projects come in that denude the wetlands, it often gets very expensive for the commission to hire the professionals that we need to review our site plan, to review the plans that come in and determine whether the impact on the wetlands are going to be substantial or not. That's why the price is set so high. Not to mention, the regulations actively try to discourage the filling or the use of the wetlands for any purpose other than being wetlands. So I think we need to take into consideration why the fee is so high to begin with. So I think it would be in the best interest of the commission to give this some thought over the course of the next month. At the meeting in in June, we can decide whether we'll grant your petition or not, and we can go from there.
Okay, I understand fully all your points. My point in the filling aspect of it is I'm not really filling area. The area had already been filled back in the 80s, and I actually dug up some the approvals that they received to fill their lawn area. So the lawn area is over here. I'm actually just raising the grade over here and with a boundary and leaving that lawn area to revert back to the wetlands. So that's why I'm looking at, it's not a filling operation, but I understand. I understand.
So, actually, if you could provide those materials to me, that would be great, and I'll include that with my review.
I can give you those tonight.
Perfect. And we can discuss.
I just had a couple quick questions, just so when we review this, I'll have them answered. Do we know what the quality of the wetland that he wants to fill is? Is it a low quality or?
To be honest, I have no idea.
You don't know?
I've gone out there, and I really didn't get heavy into the review of the application itself. So
And I think there's a house there now, right?
There is.
Has there always been a house there?
Yes, it's always been a house.
So there's
built in
nothing,
the
no other construction or structure that's been put there or taken down? It's always just been a house?
It's always been a single-family house. It was built in 60, 61, or 62, or maybe 2 years, either one of those years. And then they, back in the 80s, they went in they actually received a violation notice. They went back into the state, and they received their approval for their filling that they did. And they just maintained the area as a lawn the way it was forever, and they were granted approval. So, and it hasn't changed at all. And I'm actually not going to that distance. I'm coming away from it.
Right.
So that's where my...
It appears you need that section for parking, is that what it is?
I'm sorry?
Do you need that area for parking, is that what it is?
Yes.
There's not going to be anything built there, it's just...
No.
It's going to be a parking lot?
Area back there. Building's actually proposed for the street, right along the street frontage. All the activity that way, that would just be parking, sheet drainage down in, and...
Okay, all right.
Recharge.
That's good, fine, thank you.
I got a question. So as my understanding is, you're just looking to pay half now and half later when you put the application in?
That's
Is
about
that all we're talking about? Is that my understanding?
Correct.
Yes.
So when you come in for the petition, you want to pay half and then half when you're granted or whatever the case may be?
Correct.
All right, we all understand, is that what that is? Okay, I'm good.
Put it on the table.
Make a motion to table.
I'd make a motion.
Table?
Table.
Second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So,
Stuff to her. So what just happened?
We put it on the table.
We put it on the table for
Okay.
discussion at the next
Okay.
meeting.
All right, that's what I thought.
Decision in June.
Yeah.
And we will obviously we'll let you know what we decide, or
Review-
meeting, you can address this again.
But
Thank
you're
you
gonna
very
give
much.
Christine- You're going to give
I'm going to give
Christina
that, yes, right now.
materials.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other new business?
Thank you. Sorry, I was just getting updates that apparently we have a budget that passed, an unbalanced budget. I don't know what that means. I'm trying to get more info. But in any case, something passed. Something passed. I don't know what yet. I'm trying to find out. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's good. We don't have to walk over there.
I know. It's over. So,
Okay, that's good.
so administrative report. Notices of violation. I issued a cease and desist order to Marcin and Sylvia Mumia of 970 Cut Spring Road for an ongoing violation of inland wetlands regulations, despite 2 written and 1 verbal warning issued over the past year and a half. Since receipt of the order, the Mumias have been working with me to address violations and obtain a retroactive permit for the work already performed. Essentially, their home abuts what's called Spring Pond Park. So behind Cut Spring Road, the vast wetlands that are contiguous with Pumpkin Ground Brook contain, it's mostly phragmites and reeds in the area. They actually went past their rear property line and started to cut down some of the play area back there essentially with a swing set, a trampoline. They removed the Phragmites. They started topsoiling grading their lawn. And unfortunately, their entire backyard is an upland review area. So rather than going the violation route, which would have been rather avoidable, they've been receptive at this time after receiving the cease and desist order to abiding by an administrative permit to be issued by me. And I set out the conditions that they had to move all of their items, all their pertinent structures back onto their property, most importantly, because I don't want them having any structures on town property. So they have to move everything back onto their property. I'm allowing them to do their grading. They need to put a silt fence up at the rear of their property line. And I also allowed for them to put in a fire pit. They wanted a fire pit in the backyard, which I have no problem with. It's an upland review area. I just wish they had come to me first after having been on their case so many times. But things seem to be heading in the right direction on that. Lastly, I issued an administrative permit for the partial demolition of an existing building within upland review area of Longbrook Ferry Creek Watercourse. Address is 835 Barnum Ave, better known as Rumors Cafe. It had partially burned down.
Find anything when they put that up?
It had partially burned down, so they started to demolish a section of it. They intend to rebuild, but I drove by there one day picking up my morning tea from Dunkin' Donuts, and I saw massive piles next to Ferry Creek, and I said, what the heck's going on? So I immediately issued them a cease and desist order and told them to come to me for an administrative permit, and they were actually very kind about the whole situation, and everything's been resolved at this point. I granted them an administrative permit for demolition. They're not allowed to store any of their equipment close to the wetlands. They put a silt fence up, which is really all you can do in that situation. So, and they'll have to come back in front of us when they start the rebuilding process. Probably will also be handled administratively.
So
That's everything.
The whole structure's coming down.
Commissioners Forum?
They're gonna, not the whole structure. They left a portion of it and they're gonna be rebuilding.
Motion adjourned?
Motion adjourned.
Second. All in
Thank
favor?
you. Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Good weekend, ladies and gentlemen.